everybody. Welcome to this is our first installment of the K Club for this year. Unfortunately, we have canceled, or at least I'll say postponed, our last month's K Club, but we have rescheduled that, and we'll hopefully have that in January. So I'm Amy Shane, and welcome to everybody. Before I introduce our speaker today, we have a few housekeeping things to do. The first is that we have to roll for the much desired K Club coin, the club mug. So I'm going to shake this up, and I'll have Gary reach in and pick the name. Okay, and the winner is Rollins. Here? No. Okay. All right. Barbara will follow up with your K Club mug. So you will receive a survey at the end of the session. Please fill that out, and if you include your name, you too will be entered in the drawing for one of these highly desirable, not sold on the street K Club mugs. And Barbara will reiterate that. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We're very delighted to have Dr. Gary Miller. Actually, Dr. Miller has participated in some of our former K Club panels and has been very helpful. He is currently a professor of the Rollins School of Public Health and the 8th degree Candler Professor of Environmental Health with doctoral training in pharmacology and toxicology and postdoctoral training in molecular neuroscience. Director of the Emory Center, which is an NIH-funded center focused on the exome and the environmental analog of the genome. He serves as director of Emory's UTC Center and Emory's NIH-funded T32, launched in environmental health sciences and toxicology. He's also a Georgia Research Alliance Distinguished Investigator and received the Achievement Award from the Society of Toxicology. He serves as the editor-in-chief of Toxicological Sciences and the official journal of the Society of Toxicology. So today he is going to talk to us about the official title is Research Dissemination, between starter repositories and the traditional journal, the ways in which we can get our science out into the community, both the scientific community and the community at large. So please help me welcome Dr. Miller. Thank you.
Speak about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is research and how we disseminate our findings. As was mentioned, I'm editor-in-chief of Toxicological Sciences, which is Society of Toxicology's official journal. I've done this for about 4 years, and so a lot of my experience here comes from my role as the editor of this one particular journal, but also in that role is I attend many meetings at Oxford University Press, meeting with many other journal editors. I've had a chance to really learn a lot about the landscape of publishing over the past few years. So we've had some discussions in here in the past and other places on campus about reproducibility. This is something, if you go back, it's 2014 where you really started hearing a lot more from NIH about efforts to enhance reproducibility, and I'll show you how I think some of this publication piece ties into it. I left this slide up here about this paper from Vail and Johnson. If you haven't heard about this paper before, I strongly encourage you to read this. This is a paper where he described that the idea of 0.05 was just kind of an arbitrary number for us in determining weight of evidence, and that we should be considering a more rigorous level of experimentation. And I think I'm not convinced we need to change from 0.05 to 0.005. But when you think about looking at your data, if you publish papers where you just squeak under 0.05, you should be thinking about, am I really putting all my findings based on just clearing one little hurdle versus having 3 or 4 different ways of showing that? I think the reproducibility issue is something that it goes beyond our own circles of science in that this is something that, there's articles in the Wall Street Journal and The Economist about the challenges in biomedical research. I think it's really, it gets to the point almost starting to undermine much of what we do as scientists. When a layperson reads articles about our inability to reproduce science, there's, books like Rigor Mortis, which talks about all the problems we have with reproducing science. A lot of it comes off as being, very much understanding how we do things. But I think there's things that we have to take responsibility for and that can improve this. And it's important to note this is not a new topic, thinking about reproducibility. Descartes published this book a long time ago that talked about how to properly conduct experiments and how we do this. And so it's something that we struggled with for centuries. And even from the standpoint of the philosophy of science, as much of the work of Popper and Kuhn and Feyerabend was about how we do science, how we approach it in a rigorous way, and the best way to do it. So it's something that is important to be doing in this pursuit, making sure we have valid information, but if we keep all that information stored within our own laboratory, it doesn't do anyone any good. We have to get that information out. And it's something, again, I've put a lot of effort and thought into this, written articles about improving reproducibility, and I'll show you how I think a lot of these dissemination efforts are really critical in how we do that. So there was an article in Nature last year about this reproducibility crisis, and they surveyed people about what they thought about it and what were the things that contributed to it. I don't think it was a very scientific survey from a research standpoint, but it was still interesting to think what people viewed as being critical issues to it. One of the things that I thought was really important to this was that when you look at many of the factors people listed about selective reporting, the pressure to publish, low statistical power, methods or code unavailable, data may not be available, these all kind of fall into our dissemination of findings. So a lot of these issues are things that very much fall under what we look at from a publication standpoint. And even asking people what things could be done to improve reproducibility, again, this is a survey of scientists, is that several of these issues, I think, tie into this idea of how we report our science. And so when we think about, there's a lot of things that go into reproducibility, and there's things about mentoring we can deal with, but from a publication standpoint, where we put our data, there's clearly a role for this. And so if you look at some of the NIH requirements about reproducibility, they tell you some very specific things you're supposed to do in your grant. People have talked about this before. But I think one of the things that they've acknowledged to some degree is the use of data repositories. So the idea is that you go back, many years ago, we had lab notebooks and we had papers that we published. Now there's many more of these data repositories where you can go in and deposit raw data. Just think about this from the standpoint of, with genomic data, it was required that we did a big genomic study, you had to deposit all that into the genome databases. But outside of that, there hadn't been much of that over the last couple decades. But more and more you're seeing this happen more often. So it's something that, working with Oxford University Press, they said that they had been working with Dryad, which is a digital repository where you're able to deposit and upload really any form of data you want to. One thing that I really like to see from this is that as editor, many times people will say, I'm questioning the validity of that paper you just published. The blots are blurry. They cut something off. And if the authors had just uploaded the raw files of the blots, it would be easy to go back and look at it and say, oh yeah, it looks fine. But when someone complains to me, I have to then go ask the author to get the images from them and do all this analysis, to go through all this process. It takes a lot of time to then go back and share this information. But if people would just say, we're just going to put the blots right up there for people to see, and have that link there, we kind of cut down on that time. And if you feel uncomfortable showing the raw data, think about why you feel uncomfortable doing that. Right? It's something we shouldn't be cutting and slicing and dicing our blots so we don't see that. I recall when I was a postdoc, when we did our lab meeting and data club, this was at Duke, was that we weren't allowed, now we had PowerPoint back then 20-something years ago, but we weren't allowed to use it. The idea was we had to use an overhead projector, and this was back when you had films, that we could show the blotches that, you couldn't, mix it up and do a labeling. You just had to show the raw data what it was and what the interpretation was. And it really kind of makes you think about what is there without the sort of up and putting it on PowerPoint, what the data really look like. And then I think at that point, I really always understood that it was important that what's in the paper should reflect what was in your lab notebook. And it's just a good point to take when you're thinking about publishing that. So what Dryad does, I think their current rates, I think it's $100 to register a data set. And it's gigabyte level files, very large amount of storage. And the promise is that this will be stored in perpetuity as long as you can trust any commercial entity to do anything, right? I mean, it's something that that major publishers in Nature and Science and Cell have gone into this partnership with Dryad. So my sense is that this will stay around as long as you can expect anything to stay around for. And the idea is you're paying for that long-term storage of it. One of the things that we found was that encouraging people to share this sort of thing, it is a barrier. It takes time to prepare data to upload to a server like this. And so in our journal, we actually pay for this. We pay this charge to Dryad for any authors that get published in our journal. If their paper gets rejected, it comes down unless they want to pay the fee themselves. If papers get accepted, we go ahead and take this through. And so the idea is you deposit your data, and again, it can take any sort of file forms you want. So you can put up data, you can, tabular things from Excel spreadsheets. You can put all image files. You can put up code that you did for any sort of interpretation, any R sort of program or anything. And then that whole data set will get a digital object identifier, the DOI that your papers in PubMed always have. And so it becomes a citable place for this information. So if you said that you wrote a bunch of code for some sort of program and you uses it all the time, rather than just citing the first paper you put it in, you could cite this DOI that has the information about that coding every time you do that. And so it becomes a citable entity that you can put on your resume, your CV, or your biosketch. And I think that's a critical piece of it. It's something that can be there. But importantly, if you have like code or background information, is if you've deposited the drive before, you can cite this DOI in the paper, and it's hyperlinked right to it. And if you ever publish supplemental data, journals and publishers do very different things with supplemental data. I hate supplemental data because I can never find the files. So I'll have a paper, I have it there, you click on it, and it goes somewhere else, you have to look it up, and you have to search all these things. It's just a very hard way of finding that data in the supplemental data. But when you have it in a system like Dryad, you just click on it, and it pops right up. And so it's a much better system for identifying that information.
Yeah, a couple of questions about that, Gary. So, it's a commercial entity, right?
It's a not-for-profit, but yeah, it is still a company.
Okay, so you need to deposit to pay access?
No pay access.
Okay, and then how strict are their metadata sheets?
So they're very unstrict. They let you do whatever you want to do. They just ask for descriptors of what you did, right? So you just say, this is a raw image file. This is a this is just an Excel spreadsheet. That's all you have to do. So you don't have to do the tagging sort of thing, but you can if you choose to. If they're really letting it up to the depositor to how they put it in that way.
Okay, there's no real structure. Because I mean, ultimately, if you want to deposit the data, it's also contribute to the universal knowledge. So you want to have some structure and some tagging so that people can actually, get data sets that are similar together and
I think when you have various consortia projects where you have to have more of that meta tagging, so you want to get into a big database, I think we may ultimately get there, and I can imagine journals saying, we want it in these certain formats, and we want it at this certain place. For now, we're just trying to encourage that behavior. And it's something where, it's still only getting about 10% of the authors to engage in this because it's additional work. And my view, and I tell students and trainees, is that I don't need another line on my CV, but having a deposited data set from work that you did or data set or code that you put together is a valuable thing for a junior investigator who's trying to develop things. And if you look at your NIH BioSketch, it doesn't say you can just list publications. It says other scholarly output. And so a DOI into Dryad or Figshare or another database counts as that. And so if you put a bunch of effort into writing that code or developing that, R package or something like that, you can put those things right up there in the DOI. That's another line that it supports with work you're doing. And so you can see what they show, some of these things that come up is that it lists the authors that you would normally see. It has that DOI that can be hyperlinked wherever you go in from that. And the process is relatively simple here. You go in and you submit your data, and you submit the manuscript, and again, ideally you put these things in Dryad first, but you can actually have it come in after the fact during the revision process. And so it goes in there, while it's under review, it's passcode protected. So the reviewers get access to it, but it's not available to the general public yet. Not until it's gone through this process of being accepted, that it then gets that connection back to the published set, that when the paper comes out, it all comes out together and it's linked there. And so it's really fairly simple. It's just a matter of waiting for the signal from the publisher that, yes, this has been accepted, you can open it up. But if you said, well, I want to put something in Dryad now, you go in and do it. You can pay for it and go and do it right now and put it in and have it up tomorrow if you wanted to. And I think I'll give other examples of where I think this can fit in very nicely during a proposal process. And so we actually think we've been trying to encourage this behavior. Again, it's a voluntary process right now. Some journals, for example, like PLOS One has required that data sets be shared, and they give you different examples of doing it, but they don't enforce it, so fewer than half of the papers have the data associated with it. And so even though they're saying it's mandatory, they're not enforcing it, and so it's not quite in there. But this is what it kind of looks like on the website, is that the data, if there was an associated journal with it, it'll link it to it. It describes the files in the package. I just kind of encourage all the papers that use Dryad in our journal, we end up, listing them on a special site of the website just so you can go in and begin trying to highlight the papers that have gone and done this. And it's been very different. Different authors have chosen to share different parts of it. We're not mandating it. We're just trying to kind of encourage that open behavior. Figshare is another site. How many people have heard of Figshare? Wow. So you have to get out more. So Figshare is another one of these places where, again, the idea is to go and show this data out there. And so you can put in very complicated figures and raw data. And what's interesting is that I'll come into this more and talk about preprints, because there are some issues about copyright. But because some of these organizations, the way they're structured, and the agreements they have with publishers, this is all okay to do these things. So Figshare is a place where you can go in there and have all sorts of outputs of your academic research. Here's an example of some of the collections they have, and so they have the authors list what the collection is. So it might be genetic confirmation of some sort of study, it's backing some other piece of it, but you're able just to go in there and put this information out there. Maybe you replicated a study and got exactly the same results, and you don't really think it's worthy of an independent publication. You can want people to know about this. You put it up on a Figshare, and you replicated that previous study, and it can be there and be available to people to use. And I think that's when people talk about sort of publication bias and positive results. This is one of the ways of going to this, is that if you have negative results, there are outlets for this to show that data that you found and support that. And I've seen this used in many different ways, and I'll go through some more examples of that. This is one more detailed one from Figshare. So this was just published a couple days ago, and it has an abstract for it. It talks about the collection. You can go in and click on it and see the information that's in there. Again, people use it different ways, but it's ways of putting in very large data sets, very big figures and things, and it doesn't matter even where the information is from a publication standpoint. It's something you can go and publish in a journal later on, but you can get these things out the process of working on a grant application or another project. In thinking about the sort of sharing, and I mentioned the sort of profit-on-profit status, How many people have a ResearchGate account? How many people have shared their papers on ResearchGate? How many people know if their copyright allowed that? So ResearchGate sounds like a great thing, is that the idea is you can put in your papers, you have this nice reference to it, and it can go through and show the work that you've been doing, and it connects you all over the world. And in general, publishers like this sort of dissemination of knowledge. But ResearchGate is a for-profit company, and they are raising millions of dollars of capital based on violation of copyright. So if you paid for open access for a paper, or 12 months after it was published, it was in PubMed Central, it's fine, you're allowed to share that. But if it's still under copyright, and it's not that shareable form, you're not supposed to do that. And so there's actually been a couple, it says taken legal action, and I think that they've won some of these things, is that ResearchGate can't do this. So ResearchGate's going to start taking down a lot of the papers that are still, that aren't into that open access range there. And so again, we want sharing to occur. It's not like you can always do it in any different way, because when you have a for-profit organization, there becomes a problem with that. Sci-Hub, people have heard about this. This is the site in Russia, I believe. It's a kind of like a under-the-radar site where there's all people submit their papers to it, and you can get millions of papers there, but it's all of them are violating copyright. And so the publishers have a problem with this, because this is where they're making money, is by publishing this work and the copyright view on them. But Sci-Hub was just a rogue person who wanted to do this, but if they were in the United States, they'd be shut down, but they've been able to kind of fly under some of the legal processes from where they're hidden in Russia somewhere. And so I think it's just important to think about where you're thinking about sharing your information, is making sure that you are following the right U.S. copy law, because I think it could become a problem from a publication standpoint if you are violating those. And so again, this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and the importance of sharing information in the field. An editorial that Lance and I wrote, Lance is the chair of stats and bioinformatics at Emory, was about the sort of how you address some of these things. And for example, when you have a person who's a statistician who writes code and things, how you get credit for it. And one of the things we talked about is the use of things like Dryad to do that. And it's something where historically it's been very difficult, like how do you get credit for someone who curates a database? But now there's these systems evolving where there are ways of doing this. There are ways of getting citations to it. You actually use one of these places that has a right setup to allow that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where we choose to submit our papers. So everyone probably knows the impact factor of the last journal to which they submitted their paper. Right? And the impact factor is something that, as editors, I guess if you have a really high impact factor, you don't care about it. But if it's lower, you question it more, and your scientific rigor comes out to it. But I think that one of the really important points to think about from impact factors, that the impact factor is an average of the citations of those papers over the past 2 years in a journal. And it's this average. The challenge is that many different journals, the impact factor is driven by a few different papers. So it's like 10% of the papers drive the impact factor. And so often like 80% of the papers can have an impact citation number lower than that mean citation. If you're making decisions on tenure and promotion based on where someone's paper was published, it could have 0 citations, but they put it into an impact factor 10 journal, and be happy about it, but no one ever reads the paper, right? This is where the sort of article level metrics is really the better way to go, is how many citations does it actually have? And it's something where some, the American Society of Microbiology doesn't support impact factors in its journals. It won't publish them anywhere. And so they own like a dozen different journals. This is something too that, again, like people that have published historically in Cell and Nature and Science can easily say, oh, I don't care about impact factor, right? They're published in these really high journals. But it's something that I realize that it is an important issue, but I think it's important to think about the readership and the long-term sustainability of that journal. You submit to a paper, to a journal now that seems to have a rising impact factor, and the journal's gone in 5 years, are you going to be happy that you went to that journal versus the one that's been around for 5 or 6 decades? And it's just going to think about it. Don't just look at that one number in there, because it can be driven by 1 or 2 different papers, and 1 or 2 papers that you may not even want to take credit for because they retracted paper with a whole bunch of citations, drives up impact factor, even though it was cracked.
So Gary, you may, in terms of, usually you have a certain audience in mind, certain people working in your field, or if it's something that's a little bit outside your field, but there's a different target audience. How much does that factor in terms of the journal?
So I think one is that we don't tend to just flip through 1 or 2 journals like we used to,
so
20 years
becomes
ago.
more broad.
And it's more of a PubMed search thing, but there's a credibility piece to it, is that you want to be in a journal that people recognize. And so if you're getting outside, the liver or the kidney, what you were studying, and it's more of a mechanism, like going to a place like JDC, where people outside your field will recognize that, I think is very important. But people, I'll talk about this later, about the sort of name of the journal and what people think about it. I think you just have to think about what is it you want to see it, and what are the journals that they tend to recognize. And usually the way of doing that is finding out what people in the field actually respect and read, right? And sometimes the impact factor relates to it, and sometimes it doesn't. It really kind of depends on that. And I'll touch on that a bit more. I gave a presentation about impact factors about a year ago, and I gave an example. One journal in our field was a very high impact factor. I went through and showed that this number is the number of reviews in the journal, and this was the research articles in the journal. So they have months where they publish just as many reviews as articles. So it's great for driving up your impact factor, but it's not advancing the science by only publishing reviews. I love the annual reviews. I like reviews. They have a lot of value. But when a journal says, here, we're going to drive up our impact factor by publishing crappy reviews, even a bad review gets cited more than the primary research paper usually on average, is this the way to do it? And so when you're looking at impact factor, why does a journal have that strong impact factor? Is it something that is transient, or is it because they're publishing high-quality research papers? Now, if you have a review to publish, sure, go to a place that has high citations on it, but look at what's driving those impact factors. It's a very important piece to it. Another thing that's been happening the last few years is we had some new players come onto the publication stage. So, looking at publications, 5,000 down here, looking at some of the more well-established papers. For example, a Journal of Biological Chemistry publishes thousands of papers a year. They're publishing about half as many as they used to, but one was publishing over 30,000 a couple of years ago. This report, which is the new Nature version of it, shot over 40,000. But if you look between the two of them, you have 50,000 papers a year publishing in these open access, relatively low thresholds for publication journals. So it's good that you're getting things out there, but that's a large number of papers that are going from your more traditional journals. And so you look at the other, like within pharmacology and toxicology, you're all being dwarfed by seeing these really big numbers go to scientific reports and PLOS One. And I think that there's advantages of the PLOS journals and their accessibility and open access, but what does the average scientist do? If a paper's in PLOS One, do they value that as much as one that was in a journal that they recognize from a society or a different group? And this shows you what one of the big problems is. In pharmacology, the Journal of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, which published hundreds of papers a year, is just tanked in this time. Molecular pharmacology, they've had this rapid decline, and it's not that we're doing less pharmacology, it's the other journals are taking over. And so PLOS One, which had, I think it started by this very good view of trying to get things out there as much as possible, they still are driven on a volume. They're the Walmart of publication, is that they have to have a lot of papers, they have a very low margin, and so they have to publish a lot of different papers. They're very much driven by this. A friend of mine edits for Scientific Reports, and he said that they asked him to step down as an associate editor because he rejected too many papers. then we're reminded is that, remember, we don't really care about how important the work is. It is just sound. And their argument was that they want to accept as many as possible. Now, again, philosophically, if they want to push the papers out, that's fine. It's the fact that they don't so much care about rigor and are looking for that sort of profit motive there is the place you want to be pushing your science. Because the American Society of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics has been around for 100 years supporting pharmacologists. But when their journals are having this sort of drop-off, they're not going to be around for a while. And so Clause 1 says, we're going to charge you $10,000 for a paper, and go to JPET. Wait, JPET's closed now. You know, and so think about when you, in your own field is, I'm a big fan, now again, you know, clear conflict of interest is I am the editor of a society journal. But the idea is that that journal is backed by the society and is serving that particular field. And if you think about the sort of history of the society in that journal, it's something that there, you know that you have weight behind that journal because of that investment in that. And there's just an article in Scholarly Petition where the article by some editors about supporting science by publishing in society journals. The commentary is actually saying about, well, you said to do it, you didn't really explain why you should do this and what the value is. But the point is that if you just chase after it because of an impact factor, again, think about what people will be thinking in 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years when they look back on that paper. Is it in a journal that will still be there, that people still respect? You know, one, everyone was the greatest thing for a while, and it's kind of fallen out of favor. Impact factor went over 5, now it's gone way down, and so it's, you're going to, scientific reports will be the next one to go through this. So, when I was in graduate school, there was this journal called Nature, and Nature was great. And you could look through the old stacks in the journals of Nature papers from 100 years ago. And as a postdoc, Nature released a couple additional journals. One was Nature Neuroscience. And I remember when a postdoc, we had a paper in one of the first issues of Nature Neuroscience, and it was a big deal, and those first issues came out, had very high impact factors. So Nature Publishing Group has expanded a bit since then. So these are all the journals that Nature publishes now that people like to say are Nature journals. There are 148 different journals now. And people think it's like, well, I'm publishing in Nature Chemical Biology. Well, that actually is a strong journal, but when you have this many journals under that name, what does Nature name mean anymore if it's not in the leading journals like, you know, Nature Neuroscience or Nature Structural Biology type things? And they put their NPG on a lot of journals where Nature Publishing Group, or where people want to say Nature, even like scientific reports. I've seen people write on CVs, they published in Nature Scientific Reports. The name of the journal is Scientific Reports. It's published by Nature Publishing Group, but it's not like you got it in Nature because it was in Scientific Reports. But that's what's happening now. They're getting $40,000 or $50,000, 50 publications because that lose affiliation with the Nature name, right? When you think about that, is that if you can push Nature, I would still support that, right? Nature is a great journal, and they haven't reached any level, but and you just think about how we've really changed that, the way of doing that, when you have 148 journals that Nature publishes. And everyone wants to say, oh, I published in a Nature journal, but it doesn't really mean that anymore. It's one of these derivative journals you see coming in later. So I want to come back to kind of how we bypass some of these.
Can I ask you a question about that, Garrett? Because it seems like a lot of journals are taking that tack on having another journal, a little Nature journal, where they make you pay. Like
We've got a big journal, and yeah, they would pay for the lesser journal.
So, they're wondering what should be the response, because I feel it's inflation of these journals now.
Right.
All over the place.
Right. So you have, you know, for example, you submit the cell, it gets rejected. They say, well, we'll publish some cell reports immediately for $5,000 or $3,500 or something. If under a deadline, you're like, wow, you know, and they really kind of, it's a great marketing tool to kind of do that. But, and that's also robbing those, you know, there's been such an explosion in journals, is that I still think the idea is that if you look at the society journals, they tend to be connected. So, I mean, JCI is a society journal, right? And it's not like they have 20 different titles, but they build a mechanism in for one. I think that's a reasonable approach, and you realize it's not PI, but it still has an editorial board that's made up of similar people in there, but you just need to kind of think about that when you start that process of where you're submitting. You know, I think that the PLOS family is another good example of that, is that, you know, one are a lot of rejects from computational biology, infectious disease, whatever it was. They set up in that tiered system to capture as many articles as possible. I think, you know, Nature, a lot of their systems do the same thing, and, you know, I think that in Nature, from a marketing standpoint, it's kind of right. So you go to Nature Communications, it factors over 10, and a lot of people go there, and then it falls to the next one, but they'll just keep passing it down until ultimately they're still capturing it in their place. I mean, if they do it, I think it's just important that people understand that when they go into it, that they are trying to make money, and they have to make money to stay around, and you have to think, where are you putting your money? You know, if you can publish in a society journal and use open access, like their fee may only be $2,000 for that. And so where is it you want to go with that? Where do you want your dollars to go? To the big publishing house or organization that supports you as a scientist and holds meetings and things for you. So one of the ways of getting around this is the use of preprints. This is what, you know, I talked about briefly before about this. I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about the preprints, but this is something where each has embraced this. You're allowed to cite preprints in your grant proposals now. This is, again, not something that's brand new. So this is the first preprint in archives. This was the physics preprint over in '92, a rotating black hole in the galactic center. I'd love to have a paper with a title like that one day. But what's really pushed this in the biological sciences is bioarchive. And so this was based on the way that archives set theirs up. You know, physicists have been sharing papers for decades and decades. And so bioarchive, through publishers at Cold Spring Harbor, set this up as a way to put out things in the biological sciences. They avoid clinic-type findings, so they don't want to have things that aren't peer-reviewed that could influence healthcare. And so, depending on your work, you have to make sure that it's actually appropriate for it. But if you're talking about efficacy of a drug in a human population, they're probably not going to take it because there's that clinical implication to it. But while they say they publish clinical trials, it's something where it depends how interpretation there. But they publish in all these different areas, and bioarchive, I think they've done it in a very methodical and thoughtful way. They have very good support externally. They've got multi-million-dollar grants. It's a non-profit entity that, you know, has a good scientific backing, a good track record, and a very positive force in the field. And so a year ago, my lab submitted a paper to bioarchive. I was thinking about this for my journal. I'm like, well, we should go ahead and see what it's like to do it. And so one of the things that I found as a mentor is when you tell your graduate student that you're going to post this out that anyone can see it, it can really sharpen up the manuscript. And so I think it's a really good thing for trainees if you're thinking, it's kind of like that intermediate deadline before submission, like a pre-submission point where we're about to put it out there. Even something I actually think is a director of like a graduate program, I would expect students before they left with their PhD that they put their papers on bioarchive. Before they get out the door, they've had to put something up. They can't go all to be submitted, right? You actually have to get some of these things out there and to really encourage them to move things along. And so we just put in, like, submitted a single PDF in there. It was a very easy process to do. Was pushed a few months later in PNAS, and it was we didn't have direct comments on the site. There's a place for comments, but I sent a link to several of my colleagues to look at it before we submitted the paper, and I had a lot of email exchange from people. What was nice is that you got someone to read a paper for you, but when you put it out there like this, it's just out there more, and it was just more of a serious process for it. And so the idea is you can put these things out there, and every major publisher now says they're okay with this. There are a couple journals that are still hesitant, but all the major, you know, Nature Publishing Group, the Publishing of Science, Cell, Oxford, Wiley, Severe, all of them are okay with it. Check your individual journals, but everyone's been saying they're supporting this. And this is what it kind of looks when you go and do that. And list this information. It has the abstract, the history, and the info. So So say how many times people have accessed it and read it, downloaded the full article, and then after it's been published, it actually puts in a link to that final published version of it. But anyone that goes to it, if it's been published, they know to go to that now publication record, but the preprint is still there. And if you had a paper that took a year and a half to get reviewed, and you had grants under review during that time, you have a way of saying, here's the paper under review. You can look at it, we put it on the preprint server, you can cite it in the BioSketch, you can cite it in the grant, and the viewer can go look at it and not just believe that you said under review, right? Under review or in preparation or in submission can mean very different things, but if you say here's the actual article that they can look at, it can be a big difference when they're saying, do you really move it far enough along if it looks publication quality, and they can read it, they can judge it for themselves.
Gary?
Yes.
You mentioned before that before the publication, you got it password protected. So in an instance like that, do you put the password in?
No, so that was the data set in Dryad was password protected. On bioRxiv, it takes about a day from when you submit it, it's open to everybody. So the preprint is there for full access, people can download every bit they want to.
You can be paranoid if you do that, that's about getting spooked or something like that.
That's very true. So that's the sort of paranoia piece. And so I wrote this editorial about preprints, and Richard Seaver, who is the guy who founded bioRxiv, he took this quote out of my editorial. I quoted Peter Medlar, Nobel laureate. He talks about the endearing trait of a young researcher is the illusion everyone else is eager to do his research before you can. Like everyone thinks that's going to happen, but you think about the project you're working on, would you really totally change course if you saw someone else's preprint there? Like I see a preprint, I'm thinking, well, the person's already under review, right? They're so far ahead of us. And it's just, I think it's one of those things that, people worry about it, but in reality, if you're about to submit the paper and it's of high quality, you should be months and months ahead. Now, I think like in GWAS sort of studies where people can truly go in and 48 hours replicate a study, I understand that sort of concern. But if you made a transgenic animal or grew up some cell line, I mean, like you can tell it took months to do the work of years, that no one's going to come in right away and do that. Now, it may tip someone off and might submit their paper that they weren't aware of, but if you presented a poster at a meeting, most people are aware of these things, right? You presented it 6 months ago at a meeting, and you'll put a poster up, you'll put all this data up, but you're not concerned about that, but you're concerned about putting something up on a server. So I think a lot of it's unfounded. I mean, I would be cautious depending on what it is you have up there, but I think that we worry too much about that. And I think the potential value of having it out there outweighs the risk of someone else scooping it anyway, but I'll leave that to you. So this is something that, I think we are improving this area. I love this graph here. So this looks like a really impressive thing, how many thousands per month, but this is archive. These are the physics papers. It's a little box here. That's the preprints in the life sciences that, now we are getting up over 1,000 a month. It's actually probably about 2,000 a month now. But we still way far lag behind what they've been doing in physics for a long time. I mean, physicists are scientists too, right? I mean, so they've been okay with doing it. And if you take this little box here and look at it, this is a blow-up of this box about where they're going. You can see bioRxiv does appear to be the big one, but you are getting, Nature preceding faculty of 1,000, PeerJ preprints. There's other places that are doing it, and more and more funding agencies and they're saying this is an okay thing to do. So I think it's a good thing, and NIH has given instructions on how to do it. And I think people should think about that as if there's something that would improve their grant application, you should seriously think about doing that, because you put it out as a preprint, as a reviewer, I see it as being much more than preliminary data. It's much more than that manuscript in preparation, because you've actually put the whole thing together and it's much more a reality. Again, this is something that you're able to include this like in your progress reports too. So if you have a progress report, you feel like you've been a little bit behind and you wanted one more experiment before you submitted that big paper, you could go in and submit as a preprint missing figure 8 and work on figure 8 and get the thing in. So it's something where there is a way of doing that. It's something NIH is clearly acknowledging. Now, at the same time, it's not peer-reviewed, and everyone knows that, but it's still out there. So this is some of the best evidence of the Big Bang Theory. If if you recall, their big discovery that Sheldon and Leonard made, and they thought that was a great idea, but Sheldon said the only way we'll know for sure is we post it online to the preprint server, and they're talking about archive, because that's what physicists do. And so once they did that, they knew that they actually had made it that way. All this is, I think all of this is about why we do what we do as scientists. I wrote this editorial on literature of science and about how I feel we've gotten away from what it was as a craft, years ago when we wrote these papers to influence the field, not just churn out numbers for our CV. And I think but it has changed a lot. The way we do it is different, but it's still the idea is driving science forward and maybe focusing on those things. So all these things fit into that, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thanks very much. I know a couple people have to leave for class, but if you have any questions, we have a few minutes.
I guess you did mention the predatory journals and just the proliferation. I mean, people have a pretty good idea what those are and how to avoid them, but they do seem to be, it's like tribbles, that they're just...
The predatory journals, I mean, it was, Jeffrey Beall's list was great to call them out, but he had to kind of shut them down from some of the threats. But I notice whenever I get something that says greetings for the day, I know I hit delete. I get like 4 or 5 of these every morning, it seems like. But this is like where you kind of get back to, what you're publishing. And again, like what is I like journals that have been around for a couple decades at least. Something that has a tie to a society or, something, PNAS has been around for 100 years. So you want to look at the journals and not just say, oh, they asked me to write a review, I'm going to do that. Because one of these sort of predatory journals, you do all that work and it might be gone. You submit it might be out for a couple of days and it disappears. What do you do now? Do you resubmit it somewhere else? Not really, because you just sold the copyright to them, like you give it to them. And so I think it's really important for junior investigators to say, thinking about submitting to this journal and ask some senior people about what they think about that journal. And because there are a lot of these predatory journals, and I think that even as reviewers, it's good. I mean, there's so many of them, it's hard to keep up with it, but when I review papers, I look at the journals in which they were published, and if I see some of those sketchy journals, I go look it up and see who the publisher is to see if it's one of those that Beall's list is gone now, but you can still find archival versions of it. Because you shouldn't be allowing people to cite papers that are in predatory journals that don't have a rigorous peer review. But it takes a bit more work now to really figure that out, but I think it's something where the sort of traditional journals are still very critical to that because at least it buys you some comfort that it's truly a real journal. When you're reviewing other people's papers, you have to make sure that they're, or a CV, like you have a CV with all these papers in crappy journals that may not have been done peer review. I want to acknowledge that. Step up to it. Yes.
So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. You mentioned that it's better to publish in your society journals rather than more open access because actually you get more visibility and things like that. But what if your society's journal has an impact factor of 1 or 1.5 and somewhere else has a higher impact factor? How do you choose?
Yeah, so if you have a society journal that has a lower impact factor and it's not being read well, I would feel no allegiance to that, right? It has to be something that has to be competitive. And I'm not saying like to only do that, but it's like it's a good place to be looking at, like the ones that are investing that time in it. I think that it's just something that's one of those pieces when you're making that decision is that you may say, well, maybe the impact factor is 1 or 2 less, 1 or 2 points less. I saw a great statistical analysis of impact factor. We report impact factor after 3 decimal points. Okay. Statistically, you would never accept a paper that did this. And someone actually showed the difference between papers that had a 4 and a 5 or a 6. And they said, it's not even a matter of rounding it to the nearest whole number. He said, statistically, you have to round it to the nearest 5. That there's a difference between 5 and 10, not between 6 and 7. But the difference out to decimal points will say, oh, this journal is ranked higher, has no statistical validity. But we let publishers get rid of it. It's incredible. Actually do that. So, impact factor annoys me. You can't tell. But I think it's just one of those factors in there. You have to pick a journal that people will respect when you publish the work. So where is the work that you were citing? Where was that published? Where were those key things that drove what you were doing? And look at that as you decide where to send it.
like we're getting just a little bit of mixed messaging, because on the one hand, you want to make sure that you're publishing in the most rigorous journal and with high leadership and whatnot, but then it's also important to put out the negative results and confirm others' results. So how do you reconcile those two messages?
Well, I think it's a combination, is that you want to be open with your data and get it out different places, and there's forms doing that. There's Faculty 1000, there's, the preprints for the servers. But you still, for promotion and tenure, you still need to be in the game at some level. So the idea is that, there's some labs that will only publish in Nature, Science, and Cell, and I think that's terrible for career advancement of people in the laboratories. And it is, you have to have people publish their best work in the best journals, but their supporting work in supporting journals, right? You need to have all those things in there, and I think it's, from a standpoint of like a PI is, you see that sort of combination of it, is that you're publishing in the traditional journals, the high-impact journals, the society journals, and then some methods journals, right? You want to have all that information out, so if someone wants to reproduce what you did, all that information is available in one of those places. And so it is kind of it's a multifaceted way of thinking how you get your information out there. And there's some things that are just more amenable to the methods things on bioRxiv, a detailed methodology that a journal, like journals limit your methods. I've talked to a friend who said recently they had to cut their methods down because the editor said we have a limit on it, and they said you could no longer replicate the experiments. Right? You don't want to go to journals that limit your methods because you want to be able to have that. I actually have like a text duplication software that looks for plagiarism, and our journal as a policy allows people to plagiarize themselves in their methods. We don't want you to change your methods for that. We allow it in the methods so you can have it exactly how you had it before. Don't change it to avoid plagiarism section, because now if someone else's, that's different, but we want to make sure that people are having the methods accurate on that.
For the NIH guidelines may have changed more recently, but have you reviewed where you've reviewed a grant where someone had a preprint in bioRxiv as
That didn't start till March, and I haven't reviewed since then.
Okay. Yeah,
so I
don't remember seeing it either. I don't know how it's sort of treated in the study section. It's too early.
And I think it could vary too. I mean, I think that if you had one exciting finding in bioRxiv, it would probably, if you had 7 or 8 papers in bioRxiv, you might go, wait a second, but if it's just that most recent thing, because honestly, is that there's a good chance that by the time it gets to review, you might have a paper come out.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's kind of a key thing. If the gap's too long, people will start wondering. But I haven't observed it in study sections yet.
Thank you, Gary. And if you have any other questions,
I'll be around.
thanks to everybody, and we'll see you next month.